Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's focus on some data coming out of Kenya. Headline inflation fell in February to 4.14% in the wake of a decline in food and transportation prices. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the decline from 4.7% in January is the lowest we've seen on record, and it's actually close to the 4.04% that we saw in August last year. The transportation index was down by half a percentage point after the Energy Regulatory Commission cut the prices of diesel, conventional petrol and of course kerosene as well. That drop remains well within the Central Bank of Kenya's desired range of 2.5% to 7.5%. The highest rate in the last 13 months was 5.71%. That was seen in December 2018. Over in Ethiopia, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali will be hosting a fundraising dinner to help secure some $1 billion for infrastructure projects within Addis Ababa. According to officials, tickets for that dinner, you're going to be paying more than $175,000 per person. The dinner hopes to boost foreign investment into one of Africa's fastest growing economies. Ever since he came to power last year, Mr. Abiy has pushed for wide-scale economic reform in Ethiopia. Ethiopia prefers to raise funds itself instead of relying heavily on foreign donors. The Prime Minister sold his watch for $175,000 during a recent event for infrastructure development in Ambo, some 100 kilometers west of Addis Ababa. Some $14 million in total was raised for that event. In the meantime, Botswana has offered to lend Zimbabwe some $600 million to support its diamond industry and local private companies too. This comes amid a pretty severe cash crunch in the Southern African nation. The country's president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and Botswana's president are expected to sign the loan agreements in Harare. Now, the loan will consist of $500 million that will go into Zimbabwe's diamond industry, and another $100 million will be provided to provide help, essentially cash flow support for private companies whose operations have been really severely hamstrung by this dollar shortage. Zimbabwe's diamond sector struggled ever since the government kicked out private firms from the eastern Marange fields in early 2016 after they declined to merge under the state-owned mining firm.
We must also consider enhancing our cooperation with regards to the strengthening of institutions which support democracy. We continue to advocate for the reform and democratization of the United Nations Security Council so that it serves as the pedestal of international justice, peace and security for all member states.
The credit facility, we increased it from 500 million to 1 billion, and the details of which will be sorted out later on.
Still on Zimbabwe, citizens of the country are feeling the pain of being ravaged by hyperinflation, soaring fuel and transportation costs, and even just the extremely high price of basic commodities, especially food. For most Zimbabweans who live in South Africa, sending these basics back home has been common practice for the better part of a decade now. But even that has become a very expensive exercise, and many are being forced to cut back. Sumitra Naidu visited a transport depot in downtown Johannesburg to see how this works.
I started in the business in 2007. We were able to make ends meet all along due to our ability to help transport goods to those who are in Zimbabwe due to the dire situation back home. When a customer comes to us with goods, we estimate, based on the size of the package, how much it weighs and how much the items may be worth. The prices also depend on how much the items may cost at shops, because we also pay duty fees at the border. We charge upwards of $3.55 to transport a single bag of potatoes, mainly because potatoes are some of the items that are prohibited by the Zimbabwean government to cross the border with.
There is shortage of petrol as well as a shortage of many things such as food and soap. Even local taxes in Zimbabwe have gone up to $2.50 per person. Often at the end of the month, transport goods for 30 to 40 customers. I charge $71 for a big bag, $49 for a medium-sized bag, and $35 for a small bag. I charge $35 for each person I transport. The goods are more expensive to transport as living people are not heavy and they do not weigh me down during my drive.
For now, we buy petrol in Johannesburg and take it to Zimbabwe. One of our problems is that we deliver goods door to door, which means we sometimes will still run out of petrol. Sometimes, our cars get stuck on the other side of the border. Other times when we get to the border, the officials confiscate our petrol if it's more than 200 liters. I sometimes travel with that much as I have 3 taxis and I need to ensure they have enough petrol to return to Johannesburg. But I'm sometimes told that I need to get special permission from Harare in order to transport large quantities of petrol. Although business is not as good as it used to be, none of the transporters made less than $7,100 in November 2018.
Liberia's President George Weah is expected to meet the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday. That's going to be his first official visit to the Jewish state. Liberia has a history of voting in favor of Israel in international forums. Weah's predecessor, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, had
Years ago, CIFE is a non-political and non-profit NGO whose main objective is to develop entrepreneurship amongst women. Thanks to their efforts, a national strategic digital plan has been put in place in Tunisia.
The National Strategic Plan Digital Tunisia 2020 is structured around the following axes: guaranteeing social inclusion and reducing the digital bill for better access to training and knowledge. We also want to liberalize access equipment, expand access to broadband, and promote very high-speed networks.
According to the Women Initiative Foundation, the rate of female entrepreneurs in Africa stands at 24%. And experts say the popularization of digital technology on the continent could double this figure by 2050. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
Let's head over to Syria now, where the government is opening the door effectively for foreign companies to invest in the process of rebuilding the war-torn state. According to the UN, the reconstruction effort will cost anywhere between $300 to $400 billion. Egyptian entrepreneurs have traveled to the capital, Damascus, in order to study the possibility of being involved in this reconstruction effort. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim with all the details.
Egyptian companies already have experience in reconstruction in Libya, Lebanon and Iraq. Now they're seeking similar deals in Syria.
Syria needs infrastructure projects such as roads, water stations and real estate. This will encourage people who have immigrated to other nations to return. We will also help to transfer Egyptian expertise and know-how of various sectors to Syria.
According to the UN, the rebuilding of war-torn Syria could cost from $300 to $400 billion. Taking a portion of these lucrative contracts would create huge revenues and employment opportunities for Egypt. But the lack of funding could be a challenge. Ironically, Saudi Arabia, which has been fighting Syria's Bashar al-Assad, could actually finance his reconstruction efforts.
There are serious steps in coordination with the Saudi government to pump more money in our reconstruction projects to provide the proper equipment and all logistical support so that these projects would continue smoothly in Syria. We are expecting $100 billion from Saudi Arabia in the first phase for the next 5 years.
Experts say Saudi Arabia's economic involvement through Egypt is aimed at countering the growing influence of archfoe Iran in Syria. Meantime, Egyptian businessmen have submitted a plan to the Syrian government of the cities they will invest in Syria. The Egyptian companies are waiting for assurances from the Syrian government concerning two issues before they begin construction. First are safety guarantees for the workforce in these projects, and secondly, to alleviate any hurdles for capital inflow or outflow through Syrian banks. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
On to Niger now, where heads of state from the Sahel region met in the capital, Niamey, to validate a climate investment plan that will cover the strip from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Horn of Africa. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
The climate investment plan for the Sahel region should be implemented over a period of 10 years. This is the official decision of the heads of state and government of the Sahelian strip. The leaders are from Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea and a dozen other countries. This program, which focuses on 6 major projects, should help tackle drought, desertification, water scarcity and poverty.
Désirer de conjuguer leurs efforts en vue de lutter efficacement.
Eager nations in general, and the Sahel region in particular, the heads of state and government noted the ambitious nature of the Climate Pact. Given its overall estimated cost of $392,709 billion, they expressed their strong commitment to working together for its successful implementation.
La région du Sahel.
The Sahel region is a 10 million meter squared area extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the Horn of Africa, and it is this area that is subject to the very high climate variability. We all remember the severe droughts that occurred in this region in the early 1970s and 1980s. We also know that the decline of Lake Chad, whose current area is only 10% of that of the 1960s, is an anthropogenic factor that also has a serious impact on the river network.
Pending funding for the climate investment plan, Sahel countries have validated a $1 billion emergency investment plan for 2019 to 2025. The 17 Sahelian countries will contribute 10% to the investment plan.
We welcome the initiative to develop a climate investment plan for the Sahel region. So it is important to create this synergy for all Sahelian countries. This demonstrates a political commitment that is often lacking on some issues.
According to environmentalists, this climate investment plan for the Sahel region was essential because the region, with more than 500 million inhabitants and an area of about 10 million square kilometers, is extremely vulnerable to climate change. That weakens the living conditions of both populations and ecosystems. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
We're 30 minutes into the hour. There's plenty more content coming up. It's time for a break. Here's what's coming up next.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast. but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, the summit shortly talks in Hanoi, in Vietnam, and this was a very sharp turn from the expectations some had that they could reach some sort of agreement. Here's CGTN's Jin Ying Chow with more.
No deal for the second DPRK-U.S. summit.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. I think they have tremendous potential. I've been telling everybody they have tremendous potential.
The smiles and lightheartedness in Hanoi are reminiscent of their meeting in Singapore. Both Trump and Kim had expressed hope for progress on improving relations and on the key issues of denuclearization.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?
That's a good answer. Wow, that might be the best answer you've ever heard.
Failure to reach an agreement makes a setback for Trump, who branded himself as a deal maker. He is also under pressure at home over his ties to Russia and testimony from his personal lawyer, accusing him of breaking the law while in office. Is there anything solid coming out of the summit? One thing seems certain. Trump said that Kim had promised him that there would be no more nuclear tests. Jin Chao, CGTN.
The global index provider MSCI is expected to announce its decision to increase the weighting of China's A shares in its indices. Now, if MSCI does go ahead with that decision, more foreign capital will ideally flow into China's equity markets. CGTN's Chen Tong takes a look at the impact of more Asia inclusion on the global stage.
MSCI's announced plan is to increase the inclusion factor of China's large-cap A shares from 5% to 20% in two phases, one in May and one in August. That means more funds from global investors will flow into the Asian market, probably as much as $50 billion. That predicted new capital flow is giving global investors more confidence in China's stocks.
I think it's also a recognition that the Chinese economy rose in the global economy as what we see is the yuan and the China indicators is more influential to the global assets market. So including more shares in the MSCI index means the index is also probably more accurate to reflect the health of the global economy.
Months before MSCI's expected announcement, a substantial amount of foreign capital was already moving into China's markets. Over 60 billion yuan came in last month alone, a historic high since the opening of the Shanghai-Hong Kong Stock Connect in 2014. Some experts note that the result of all this should be to give the investors in China's markets a more mature profile.
We do believe the interest level, specifically in Chinese A shares, will continue to rise among global investors. Ultimately, that will lead to a further increase of capital going into the market, but more importantly, a change of market dynamics, a change of investor profile in Chinese A shares, which most likely is going to make it a more sophisticated market.
In addition to increasing the weighting of large caps, the MSCI is also to consider adding China's shares to the list of segments eligible for inclusion starting from May this year, and perhaps also to add Chinese mid-caps with a 20% inclusion factor next year. With all the milestones coming, China International Capital Corporation predicts that China's A-shares can expect an annual foreign capital inflow of between 200 billion and 400 billion yuan in the next 10 years. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, still in China, authorities report that the country's manufacturing and non-manufacturing sectors experienced a slight decline this month. They say the Purchasing Managers Index in both areas saw a has details.
China's manufacturing activity slowed in February as factories reduced production during the Spring Festival. The official Purchasing Managers Index fell to 49.2 from January's 49.5, the weakest level in 3 years.
Due
to the influence of the Spring Festival, the production and business activities for enterprises slowed.
Sub-indices, the new order index came in at 50.6. That is up 1 percentage point from last month, indicating a rebound in manufacturing market demand. Meanwhile, the official non-manufacturing PMI fell slightly to 54.3 in February, but still well above the 50-point mark that separates growth from contraction. Construction business is among the best performers, with an index of 59.2.
The PMI sub-index for construction business has fallen slightly, but the industry is generally maintaining a high level of prosperity. As the weather warms up, construction work will speed up. We can expect rapid development in the sector.
Other best performers include transportation, telecom, and financial services. The sub-index of service industry is 53.5 in February. The fast-growing services sector accounts for more than half of China's economy and has helped buffer the impact of a slowing manufacturing sector. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN.
On to Italy now. The latest economic data points to the country's deep financial and economic struggles. EU leaders, in fact, are issuing a series of warnings about the potential effects a recession in Europe's fourth largest economy could have on other EU members. Here's CGTN's Michal Bardavid with more.
The Italian economy, Europe's third largest, is struggling. According to the Italian National Institute of Statistics, Italy's economy contracted for a second consecutive quarter at the end of 2018 as it shrank by 0.2%. This officially put the country by definition in a technical recession. The fact that one of Italy's main trade partners, Germany, is also seeing an economic slowdown with zero growth reported in its last quarter of 2018 is not helping. But aside from external factors, the political climate in Rome may also be causing part of the problem.
We have internal factors that we are experiencing, and in particular confidence. Entrepreneurs do not have confidence now in economic policies of the current government, and they are delaying investment or hirings.
Some experts also point out that structural reforms are needed.
We have an entrepreneurial system which is very much still based on small firms, very often unlisted and held by families and also managed by family entrepreneurs. And I think now with the challenges of globalization and innovation, we need firms that become more structured, they become larger, they become run by more by professional managers.
The Italian government is taking some action. In March, a new program that aims to support people in need, called the Citizens' Income Program, will come into effect. But some business leaders say the government also needs to take preventive measures and change the country's perception.
For instance, reassuring on the public debt that can bring down the spread, or start having a more pro-entrepreneurs mood, or start lowering the labor cost for the private sector. Labor cost is very high in Italy.
Markets reacted with little concern over a technical recession because the country's stalled growth had been known for some time. But some EU leaders have warned an economic downfall in Rome will likely not only affect Italy, but other EU countries as well. Michal Bardavid, CGTN, Rome.
Right then, it is the final day of this year's edition of the Mobile World Congress. It's taking place in Barcelona. A huge buzz at this year's gathering has been the arrival of the world's first 5G handsets. Phones that are able to fold and double up as both smartphone and tablet have also gotten a lot of attention. Several countries are poised to take the lead on the infrastructure needed to support 5G networks by the end of the year. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia plans to be a first mover with the rollout of 5G networks that should ideally contribute more than $19 billion to the country's GDP and hopefully create some 20,000 jobs by 2030. Now, underpinning this entire development around 5G tech, of course, is a global semiconductor industry, the guys who make the chips that are in everything we use these days. The industry has been in a bit of a bind, though, since last year. Some analysts, however, are saying that between 5G and demand for chipsets from machine learning and artificial intelligence, the industry could get a much-needed jolt. But trade tensions are clouding that outlook. Here's CGTN's Jim Spellman with more from Washington.
The global semiconductor industry has been struggling since October. Some companies have been stable or seen growth, but stock prices of many industry leaders have fallen sharply. AMD down more than 20%, Qualcomm down more than 25%, and Nvidia down more than 40%. Analysts say excessive inventory, global trade tensions, and the near collapse of the cryptocurrency market have contributed to the declines.
It is an industry where there's a lot of volatility, where progress can be very rapid, but it is cyclical, and therefore there is a tremendous amount of unpredictability.
The coming wave of 5G technology and artificial intelligence may help boost the semiconductor industry.
When you think about new retailing and the manufacturing capabilities and also automation, and all these processes would need faster data processing. It's the infrastructure. 5G will empower these sectors, I think, even more.
Millions of new devices, from electric cars to smartphones to internet-connected appliances, will rely on semiconductors. Industry insiders say this will increase demand.
We expect a very, very strong second half, and a second half that will, more than compensate for the modest start that we have in Q1.
But even if 5G and AI provide a boost to the semiconductor industry, trade tensions may blunt the impact.
This is not just about geoeconomics, it is also about geopolitics. So you have disputes over patents, you have disputes over secrecy, over espionage. In certain cases, there are elements of mistrust that need to be overcome. It's very difficult for anyone to plan in the semiconductor industry because so much is innovation that sometimes cannot be predicted. So cooperation is very useful, and indeed when you have these disputes, that ultimately doesn't benefit anyone.
Analysts hope that if a trade deal between the U.S. and China materializes, it will include provisions to boost global cooperation on 5G technology. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Right then, so this year's event, 5G, really has been front and center at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Essentially, it's mobile's next generation, and now it's a reality. It's not just something we talk about on sets like this anymore. It's faster, it's more stable, it's more versatile than any of its predecessors. CGTN's Filio Contrafuri tells us how our lives will be changed by tech's next big thing.
After years of being just a theme, 5G finally arrived at this year's telecommunications gathering in Barcelona. The biggest buzz has been generated by the arrival of the first 5G phones. 5G is a complicated technology that will offer faster connection on more devices. The industry says it will take time to roll out, yet it's something that can transform everyday life.
5G, the technology, has a tremendous, opportunity. More than anything else, if you look at the latency and then the data speeds, those two things, there's more than that to 5G, but those two things alone means that a consumer really won't know the difference between what's physically on the phone versus what's in the cloud. Everything should just work seamlessly because it's incredibly fast.
Several countries, including the US, China, Australia, and some European nations, will be among the first to have developed the necessary infrastructure to support 5G networks by the end of the year. Saudi Arabia plans the largest 5G rollout in the Middle East. The technology is expected to contribute more than $19 billion to the country's GDP and create almost 20,000 jobs by 2030.
It's not a question of why 5G, but when. Because this is a trend that we foresee it's going to accelerate the next move to the digital age. We are moving into a world where the confluence of connectivity, big data, and AI is going to ignite new use cases and transform societies and economies. It's really a question of when 5G will pick up.
The Saudi minister says 5G has enormous potential to advance daily life in ways we can only imagine.
In healthcare, last year alone, we celebrated 1.4 million consultations that were delivered virtual, so practically from your smartphone, where 50% were delivered by man, by a physician, and 50% potentially were experimenting that can be delivered by machine, by AI, deriving meaning from data. Harnessing and connecting the world with 5G is going to accelerate that move to a data-driven economy to improve education and healthcare.
Until then, countries will have to continue investing millions in their 5G rollouts until they have the infrastructure to support the technology and its potential. And though 5G is here in its earliest form, it will still be years before it fully revolutionizes the telecommunications industry and our lives. Filio Contrafori, CGTN, Barcelona.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. Brent crude basically holding orbit around the 65, 66-ish level, down about 0.4 earlier today. Cocoa is a bit more of an interest for us at the moment because the two main producers are right here in Africa, that's Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana right next door. The international agency that essentially works on the cocoa side of things expects a bit of a surplus this year, and that partly explains the price trend that you're seeing at the moment. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why a deadly horse disease is threatening South Africa's exports to the EU.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Penninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Let's head over to South Africa now. The export of horses from South Africa straight into the EU could be around 3 to 4 months away. You see, right now, horse exports from South Africa are under embargo due to the outbreak of African horse sickness. Therefore, any horses from South Africa have to go through Mauritius And that in turn has affected both sales and costs tremendously. CGTN's Travis Andrews filed this report.
South Africa is known globally to have a fine pedigree of racing horses that have gone on to shine on racing circuits around the world, which has in turn left them in high demand overseas. Horse racing is an important sector for the Western Cape's economy and contributes around $300 million to the GDP. It also creates jobs in both the gambling and stud breeding sectors. But reported cases of African horse sickness means that local bloodstock still currently ships via a quarantine zone in Mauritius, but that's expected to soon change.
We're constantly working on improving our export status. South Africa's now reached a stage where we're ready to export to the world. We have safe and sustainable pathways. South Africa's upskilled all of its disease risk measurements in order to meet or exceed any of the requirements of the European Union and the World Animal Health Organization.
EU approval means other markets are likely to follow with direct imports, and that means business is likely to boom at Western Cape stud farms. South Africa's provinces have traditionally been quarantined as individual zones, but the disease has still managed to enter via uncontrolled horse movements, giving veterinary authorities a huge headache. Now, even though Cape Town has a quarantine facility, the African horse sickness disease means it still has to go via Mauritius, which is double the cost and double the length of time. But international buyers are optimistic about the quality and believe Western Cape equine in particular could be in for much faster export times.
So you can get extremely good value here in South Africa. And I think that, that's the attraction. Come down to a beautiful place like Cape Town and buy some really good horses, and in the hope that they can travel. They have to at the moment go through Mauritius, but if in time, very soon, they can travel direct to Europe or to Hong Kong, China, then that would be really exciting, and you get tremendous value here.
So all that remains is for the EU Animal Health team to give the final nod, and the local industry could be set for export projections of around $100 million per annum. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Over in Kenya, the CEO of the Kenyan-based ride-hailing firm Little, the man, of course, is called Kamal Budabati, says that his company will soon be expanding to Tanzania and Ghana this year as part of plans to compete with foreign offerings like Uber and Taxify. The firm plans on raising some $50 million more in capital from investors. CGTN's Terry Wangari has the details.
Kenya's ride-hailing company Little will start offering rides in Tanzania's commercial capital, Dar es Salaam, next week and plans to launch in Accra, Ghana by May. The firm's CEO, Kamal Budabati, says the ride-hailing company is in talks with investors to raise about $50 million in series, a fundraising which it hopes to finalize by the middle of 2019.
Little cab. Yeah. We are meeting a couple of investors both on the continent and in the Silicon Valley, and the interest is there. We are just trying to figure out. We are hoping that the investment should close in the course of mid of this year.
Little, which competes with global players Uber and Taxify in Kenya, is valued at between $70 and $75 million, a minuscule number compared to its billion-dollar rivals. The firm is competing with them by offering drivers additional ways to earn an income.
Our drivers are agents. They can sell insurance for you, they can sell airtime, they can pay light water bills, they can do all those little things around that increases their income. So then if you are doing that, then you don't actually start fighting just on the price war that's happening at the moment.
The 2.5-year-old company has 10,000 drivers operating in Nairobi and over 1 million users on its platform, with more than 60% of those in Kenya. Last month, Little launched a bus service in Nairobi on its platform, on top of its taxi services and motorcycle boda boda offerings. The company is also looking into doing deliveries.
I think the middle income consumer, middle and the above, is what we feel that we are targeting. But you see, that's where also we come into the place, because we also have a product for boda boda, which is two-wheelers. And we also have a product for shuttle, which is like a mass transit platform. So if you look at it, for us consumer, because of the spread is bigger, any consumer who needs transport somewhere down the line fit in some of our products.
Little is available in Kenya for a segment of the market that doesn't have smartphones. The company worked with mobile operators and introduced a short code which allows it to identify a passenger's location and provide a ride. It plans on using its capital to invest in technology and geographical expansion to accommodate the expansion. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And finally in Paris, where a French fashion label created by a student has been giving factory workers the opportunity to be designers instead. The first collection is a collaboration with 4 African migrants. With Paris Fashion Week underway, the spotlight is on an industry that is striving to become a bit more ethical. Laura Lubengo has more.
In the Parisian suburb of Saint-Denis, 4 African-born garment workers are bringing their own designs to life. They are all immigrants employed at Mode Esteem, a small factory that helps marginalized people integrate into the workforce. Their creations are inspired by the blue-collar outfits worn by manual laborers.
Le titre, c'est La mode est mon refuge.
The title of this project is Fashion is My Refuge. I took refuge in it after everything I've endured in my life. And these Kalashnikovs symbolize the things that caused me to lose my foot. And I don't want my children to use them because it's not good to live with them.
Cette matière, parce que ce n'est pas une bonne matière de vivre avec.
And on the inside, there's a photo. Here's my photo. With each of the piece of clothing we make, we are required to put our photos inside because I made this. And when you look at this big head, it's mine.
On a les obligations de poser la photo.
Non, j'ai commencé comme un simple.
I started as a simple worker, and after 2 years of working here at Mode Esteem, the creative director Kim Hu came along and presented us with her project. She let us choose our own designs and create whatever clothing we wanted. She was there to accompany us. We checked whether she liked what we did, whether it was good for her, and then we started to create, to invent things from the past, from the present.
The project is a collaboration with fashion label About a Worker, founded by student designer Kim Hu.
Well, I think, of course, you get to know them, you get to know their personal stories, but also you get to see how they can get empowered by a project. And that's the most important, I think, is that this project is not only a way for them to just communicate a message, but it's a way for them to feel valued, because most of the time they feel undervalued, I would say, and at the bottom of the chain, when actually they are probably the most important people in fashion.
Ethical manufacturing is often at odds with the fashion industry. Global production is largely dependent on low-wage factory workers as the industry seeks to widen profit margins. Now, designers like Hu are part of a collective shift towards a more responsive value chain system that is not exploitative. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program for you. So 100.05, give or take, is a relevant number for the Kenyan shilling against the American dollar. Inflation data coming out earlier today, they made for fairly interesting reading. Some pretty big drops in food commodities. Maize, for example, both grains and flour down by anywhere between 40 to 30% on an annual basis. But we are seeing some pretty big jumps on the energy side. Electricity prices, for instance, up by at least 15%, give or take. How will that then feed into headline inflation moving forward? We'll have to wait and see. Those are your currencies, and that is it for tonight's edition of Global Business. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them, of course, on your screens right now. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today's up next from Washington, D.C.